Hey there! I thought that what I would do today is a bit more of a theoretical video, and I was kind of looking to do some more theoretical videos where I talk about topics related to fountain pens that I find interesting. And I was kind of prompted to do this by Carol. Carol asked me a couple of questions, left me a YouTube comment with a number of questions, which I all thought were very thought-provoking and interesting to think about. So there we go. Now, don't worry, I'm also going to continue to review products and all that. Trust me, that's going to remain. But for now, let's do a little bit of talking. And I also know these videos are not for everyone, and that's perfectly fine. Right? Okay. The first question that Carol asked was, why are we attracted to expensive pens? And I thought that was a really good question. Now, a long time ago, I did a video entitled, Are Expensive Pens Worth It? And the main conclusion from that video was any pen is worth whatever you're willing to pay for it, right? If you want to spend $2,500 on a Lamy Safari because it's a very rare Lamy Safari and you collect Lamy Safaris and this is the one opportunity you'll have to get it, that's perfectly fine. And if you don't, you don't. And that's also perfectly fine, right? But that's not really what I want to focus on, because I have that older video on that indexed on my website. You can find it. Are expensive pens worth it? But why are we attracted to expensive pens in the first place? Now, that's an interesting question that I gave some thought, because here I think all kinds of psychological factors come into play, which I found very interesting as I was thinking about it. Let's be fair. A fountain pen is not worth it. I mean, if you look at it, it's very simple. If you look at it penny for penny, I don't think there's any fountain pen that's worth it. Even the sort of entry-level models, think of a Lamy Safari, think of a Pilot Metropolitan, these kinds of pens, I don't think you get the value penny for penny that you pay for it, let alone that you spend $500 on a pen, $1,000 on a pen, $1,500 on a pen, etc. Then why do we do it? Because when you really, when all is said and done, it's very simple. This pen, which I got at the Red Deer Museum and Art Gallery, of course, simple ballpoint, although it is metal, it's kind of nice. This will write, and this will write just like this will write, but then this was more expensive than this was. Just a bit. Then why? Well, I think there's a couple of ways to answer that question. I think a lot of different angles can be, I said that very enthusiastically, angles can be used here, right? The first is a very psychological one, but one that I think is absolutely true when it comes to expensive pens. And that is cognitive dissonance reduction. So in other words, this is a social psychological phenomenon where, say, you have bought a pen and it's very expensive, and then you think, why did I spend so much on a pen? This is ridiculous. And that gives you cognitive dissonance, and then you try to reduce that by coming up with arguments that are more or less rational. More or less, right? So something like, but it's a fountain pen. Yes, it was $500, but it's a fountain pen, and fountain pens are just superior. They just give you a superior writing performance to ballpoint. So I was justified in buying this. And then you feel better because then that cognitive dissonance has been reduced, right? I think that definitely comes to play, especially when you go for more and more expensive pens. And of course, that varies depending on your situation, what would constitute an expensive pen to you. But I think that often comes into play. Well, I must really like this because I spent X amount of currency on this. Another thing that I think comes into play is that fountain pens offer a sense, I'm just making another note as I go along. Fountain pens offer, or at least can offer, a sense of luxury. And yeah, maybe a $5 Chinese pen does not. But on the other hand, even a $5 Chinese pen kind of does, because a fountain pen stands out. It's not yet another ballpoint, which a large proportion of the population uses. So there is that sense of luxury, and I think that is something that matters. Now, even if a fountain pen, is not worth the price penny for penny, which again, I don't think it ever is, even with a Safari, even with a Metropolitan, even with these things, Bear in mind, even with a Chinese pen that you may buy for $5, the person selling it to you is still making a profit, right? So it's still not worth exactly that what you paid for it. That sense of luxury matters, and I think we often strive for that. We want to experience that. And yes, I think that there are pens, especially if you get to a reasonable level, and this is not a hard and fast rule. I'm just describing this from my personal viewpoint. But I think when you, first of all, when you get to a certain price of pen, you're kind of buying that luxury, and you're buying the excessive trims and the rhodinated or gold-plated detail, all this kind of stuff. Maybe it's limited, whatever. But there is a certain price where I think you experience, yes, this is a very luxurious pen. I noticed I remember when I bought my first solid gold nib fountain pen, as if it's going to Opera Elements, the Fire. I was very pleasantly surprised by how it wrote. And I think I got a very good deal on that. I don't think that was a matter of me trying to reduce cognitive dissonance. It was the first time I used a beautiful, somewhat springy, solid gold nib. And it was a completely different experience from all the steel nibs I'd used up to that point. Now, I'm not saying, let's be very clear, that gold nibs are always better, but all I'm saying is that it's just a slightly higher segment of the market. And I happened to luck out with a very good 14K Visconti nib. Had that nib been terrible, I don't know if I would be talking to you today, because I might have had a completely different view of fountain pens. I might never have gotten to reviewing in the first place. So anyway, that luxury, that sense of luxury, is something that I think people value. And it is enjoyable. Try doing, I'm just using a car analogy here, which is very dangerous because I'm not a car person at all, nor do I know anything about cars. But imagine going on a road trip for 8 or 10 hours. In a very standard run-of-the-mill car, all the standard options, nothing fancy, nothing stands out, nothing is luxurious. And then imagine making that same road trip in a very high-end car with the leather seats, with all the trims and all the fancy stuff. There will be a difference. It's impossible to deny. Both cars will get you exactly to your destination, provided they don't break down, but your experience will be different. It will be luxurious in one case, and it will be okay in another case. Right? And that sense of luxury, that to me is important. Not because I insist on luxury, because there's a lot of forms of luxury I don't care for in life. I don't care for the cars, I don't care for the expensive watches, I don't care for the super high-end clothes, I don't care about any of that, but I like a good pen. So that sense of luxury, that matters to me, and I think it matters to other people. And this is not, I would like to emphasize, to me at least, this is not some sort of snobistic thing of, I need to have a better pen than anyone else. No, I just really like the fountain pen. Tied into this, to me, is a bit of a sense of exclusivity. You use a pen that depends a bit on where you live, but here in Canada, where I am now, most people do not use a fountain pen. And even in Europe, where I grew up, we still have fountain pens in school. Most people do not use a fountain pen. So there is a bit of a sense of exclusivity. You are doing something that's different, right? And to some people that matters, being different from the rest, setting yourself apart. And I think that can be a motivator to use a fountain pen. I have had many conversations. I teach at a college. I have had many conversations with students as well as faculty members who saw fountain pens and my pens and were like, what's that? A fountain pen? I haven't seen that in years. Or I didn't even know people still use that. At some point, I was in line at Tim Hortons, very Canadian, at the college, and our ex-dean was behind me in line. And he said, "So, Stephen, I hear you are a fountain pen aficionado too." It was a very interesting moment. And I said, yeah. And we had a conversation. He had a Schaefer that he uses. He was sensible. He only had one fountain pen. That's a sensible thing to do. But he really loved it. And he cared for it. And he cleaned it. And he took it to meetings. And he used it. So he said to me, it's just different. It's just different. And it feels different. It's not. And once you've used this, you can't use a ballpoint. I was like, yeah, I know what you're saying. So there's that sense of exclusivity. We're different from the rest, and I don't mean that in any negative way, because that can be interpreted many ways. I don't mean that it's not better. It's just different. You set yourself apart a bit, and for some people that really matters. I also think that fountain pens, if you're watching this video, you're probably well into fountain pens. There is a sense of community in fountain pen users, which I never knew existed until I started to get into pens and research pens, and you find out there's a whole world out there with pen shows, with pen forums, with pen meetings, with pen clubs. And that sense of community, I think, is also very interesting, and is something that appeals to a lot of people. For me, it was great. For Aziza and me, it was great, I should say, because we moved from the Netherlands to Canada, and immediately people reached out to us, both in Ontario and in Alberta, from local pen clubs, that you should join our meetings. So you go to a completely new country, and you're immediately part of a crowd of people, and some of those people have definitely become our friends. Right, so that's an amazing, that community is very special. Now, that's not unique to fountain pens. I'm sure you have this in other communities, watch communities. I hear interesting things about watch communities, but you know what I mean. That type of clubs, meetings, etc. That I think can be very, very beneficial too. So, the final thing I wanted to say, before I'll try to draw a conclusion. I've tried not to ramble. I hope I succeeded. But the final thing is, there does seem to be a trend towards analog things. Fountain pens are an analog thing. Typewriters are an analog thing. I think a word processor will vastly outperform a typewriter in many of the functionalities it offers. But people go back to typewriters, and some people really like that. I'm sure that's not my scene, but I definitely don't judge, of course. I mean, I have a skeleton wearing a hat there, so who am I to disagree? But anyway, that movement toward going back to something analog in such a digital world, I think is also a very interesting appeal of using fountain pens. Now, this was a very, very broad answer to a much more specific question. Why are we attracted to expensive pens? I think some of the parts of the answer I've given are very general, like being sense of a community, because that, again, is not just a pen thing. Some, I think, are much more specific, like there is that sense of luxury, there is the maybe a bit of a feeling of exclusivity, which that is not the most important aspect to me, but there is that. Maybe the final thing to say is just the comfort. To me, a fountain pen is a much more comfortable writing instrument than a ballpoint is, or a mechanical pencil is, or a pencil is, or a rollerball is. I just really love a fountain pen. I love to be able to select my ink, to have fountain pen ink, to have different inks, to match up inks and the colors of pens, that kind of stuff. That I find very important, and that to me matters most. But yes, having said all of this, I'm yet to see a fountain pen that's really worth it, penny for penny. I don't think it's ever going to happen. And yet, we feel an attraction to such things. And that's interesting. I'm not sure, Carol, if this was an answer to your question. Again, I've tried to make this as structured as I could, and yet I feel at this point it was incredibly disjointed, so I tried. That, I think, is my answer. I hope this was useful. By all means, let me know what you think. What attracts you in fountain pens? What attracts you in expensive pens? Do you refuse to use expensive pens? Because I know there are people in my audience, in the viewership here, who definitely refuse or simply cannot afford expensive pens, and that's a limitation. I've talked to people about that. And all of that's fine. I just want to know what your opinion is. What do you think about this topic? And while you're at it, maybe also let me know if this is a type of video that you find interesting to watch. Because I was kind of hoping to do, again, I will continue to do product reviews, and that will be the main focus of the channel. But talking about these things once in a while, I think it's kind of interesting as well. So, I hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you later. Bye-bye.